My name is Natasha Zaretsky, and I am a faculty member in the Department of History here at UAB. Like so many of us right now, I'm watching the news and reading everything I can about the coronavirus as we live through this time of tremendous crisis. Um, and one of the things that has stood out to me is that, at least in the United States so far, it appears that some communities are being much harder hit than others. And in particular, it looks like African American communities are especially vulnerable to the coronavirus, both in terms of the number of infections, but also the fatality rates. And this stood out to me immediately because, just by coincidence, for the very first time, I'm teaching a class on health and illness in recent um, US culture. And one of the things that we've looked at over the course of the semester is something that scholars of public health have long recognized, and people who work in public health have long recognized, which is that there are enormous racial disparities and also a history of medical discrimination in the United States. So when I was reading about the coronavirus, I was immediately struck by some of the resonances between what's going on right now, the ways in which the African American community is being especially hard hit, and this earlier history. So, in light of that, I actually wanted to recommend to all of you a book that was the very first book that I assigned in my course. And it's a wonderful book. It's called The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, and it's written by a science writer named Rebecca Skloot. The book was first published in 2010, and it tells the story of Henrietta Lacks, whom you can see here on the right. Now, as you can tell, Henrietta Lacks died tragically at a very young age. She was only 31 years old. She died in 1951. But the thing that makes her such an important historical figure, such an important figure in the history of medicine and science, is that at the time of her sickness and death from cervical cancer, her cancer cells were cultured, and they became the first cells ever to become self-sustaining in a laboratory. This was something that researchers and cell biologists had been looking for a long time, a cell line that could be reproduced and then used by researchers. And her cells, her cancer cells, were incredibly powerful and reproduced in labs, and were soon exported and sent to scientific laboratories all over the world. The cell line became known as HeLa, based on the first two letters of her first and last names, and the line became used in research on virology, on developing the polio vaccine, on gene mapping. In fact, for many of us, including myself, have had medical procedures that were developed and eventually perfected by researchers who relied on the HeLa line. Now, what's really amazing about this book is that actually Rebecca Skloot tells not only the story of Henrietta Lacks's life and the story of the cell line, but she also tells a really painful thing about the story, which was that Henrietta Lacks herself, neither she nor her family ever gave consent to Johns Hopkins Hospital for the culturing of her cancer cells. They really themselves, being very, very from a poor rural African American background, didn't even really understand the science behind the reproduction of the cell line. No one at Hopkins ever took the time to really explain to them what the significance of the cell line was. So there was never any consent from the family. There was never any compensation for the use of Lax's cells, and Skloot very deftly kind of looks at some of the complexities surrounding that. But what Skloot does, I think, really powerfully is place the story of the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks within this much longer context of marginalization of African Americans by the medical establishment, and the thing that's really beautiful about the book is since the book's publication in 2010, there has been an attempt to sort of heal the relationship between Lax's descendants and the Hopkins Hospital, and to really restore Lax to the vital role that she has played in science and medicine. And that role is still ongoing. It's entirely possible that the HeLa line is being used right now to come up with therapies and vaccines for COVID-19. I'm just making a pitch for people out there to take a look at Skloot's book. It's very accessibly written. It's a great read. My students at UAB absolutely loved it. Not all of us have extra time for reading right now, but some of us, while we're at home and business as usual has sort of stopped, if you're looking for a fantastic work of nonfiction, I really can't recommend Rebecca Skloot's book enough. So check it out, stay safe, and be well. Thanks.